Now the hard talk will start from them. So we get the typical questions from the audience. Who wants to? Okay, Okay, we start from the back. Kojo, and then Gavin, and then yeah. Oh, Kojo.
Yeah. To specific policy formulations. Are we saying that there shouldn't be land markets? Are we saying there shouldn't be investment in land? Are we saying that there should be ceilings on investment in land? Are we saying that there shouldn't be transnational investment, that investment should be nationally bound? Or exactly what? Are we saying there shouldn't be capitalism? Or,
That's a good start.
so exactly what are we saying, and where does it apply to? How are we going to define land grabbing, and is it also going to apply retrospectively? This is going to be a new policy for the world, that there shouldn't be large investments in agriculture everywhere. And what vision do we have of the future? Is it of an industrial future, or is it going to be a future of peasant collectives, or what? These are some of the questions that I'd like to see addressed. How are we going to address land grabbing? What is the vision of a kind of society?
Okay, well, I'm afraid this will be a little bit emotive, because yesterday I felt actually that we were subjected to an enormous amount of dribble about voluntary guidelines. That seems to be the consensus which is forming. And absolute dribble, really. I mean, the idea that somehow we can genuflect in front of the all-dominating power of the market and maybe be a little bit nice, and nice outcomes will come, these win-win scenarios. Actually, at the time when the credibility and the legitimacy of unregulated markets has never been lower, following the great financial crash of 2 years ago. And a really strong urge from people around the globe, including here, who are paying the price of bailing all of that out, for there to be real regulation, for us to get away from the sort of third wayest win-win scenarios and back into real strong regulation again. But we heard another perspective as well this morning, which was that of Yulian, who's representing the Indonesian peasants farmers. And here's a policy proposal for you, because Yulian said quite clearly that from their perspective, which I think is a perspective which matters, land grabbing, he said, is a global crime, it's mandatory, and he said there must be a moratorium on it now. So here's a policy proposal. Instead of talking about voluntary guidelines, etc., why aren't we pouring our energies, such as they are, into helping to build up and support organisations like his, so that when they come along to grab his land, they can actually grab it back. They can grab it back from militant occupations. They can grab it back by mobilising the forces at the bottom of society who are paying the price for this. Surely, if we're going to have policies, that's where they should be orientated.
Steve Correa from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. A question for anyone on the panel. I remember when I was studying my undergrad in the mid-90s that I was reading policy reports and research on the famine crisis in Ethiopia and so on, and how all the agencies and NGOs advocated for food security programs, control of food markets and so on. So my question to you, I don't work in this field, is why we have lost 20 years, and why do you think we're still talking about these issues, and why do we think that this time things are going to be different? And these ideas of going back to a small-scale peasant agriculture, food security, land tenure, blah blah blah, is this time going to succeed? So please make me a bit more optimist. Thank you.
Hello. This is a question for those of you who work in multi-party democracies. Do you form alliances temporarily or permanent with political parties? What is your stand on using political parties or partnering with them when it comes to land grabbing operations?
I would like to support the plea, your plea for universities to be more accountable to communities, even though we do then run into the problems that you mentioned about communities not being homogeneous entities. But I'm afraid that the developments in most of the European universities are a move away from that accountability. We are supposed to also get closer to the private sector. In the case of my university, very literally, we're going to move our campus to the business center, where indeed, as you said, all these crooks are working that took our taxpayers' money. And we have had our national research foundations had its budget cut in half, and half the money went to the private sector for research and development, because that's where the innovation is going to come from. I really agree with you that when our board of directors says we have to move closer to society, it means also moving closer to and being accountable to the people that you talk about, and not just private sector. But I'm afraid that's not the direction that most of the universities in Europe are going in.
Two short comments. The first one is on a question of definitions. Just like the concept of degraded, this issue of food security and what it means needs to be unpacked, and we need some kind of typology about this, because you made a comment, the gentleman from Via Campesina, sorry, I forgot your name, that there's no land grabbing that is linked to food security. But this is exactly what's being claimed. If we think about food security as producing food for a nation rather than importing it, then this is exactly the kind of arguments that are being put forward by decision makers at the national level, that we're actually promoting food security through large-scale land acquisitions and foreign investments. So we need to unpack what this means for different people and show that there are different definitions and they mean very different things, so that we're not talking in blanket terms about that. It's not an accusation for you, it's for all of us to take on this challenge a little bit more. And then just to comment on this research advocacy linkage. I think we need these cases of Wilmar, for example. We desperately need that they be documented so that we begin to learn lessons about what pathways work. Because for us, we have limited bandwidth, and often we have institutional mandates that keep us from going downstream into advocacy, lest we lose our reputation of independence. And so we need more of an understanding of actual cases where it works, how it works, and then we start orienting our energies in more productive ways. So thank you very much for a very exciting.
Boyer from Appalachian State, and would like to pursue the question of the balance between the local and the transnational organizing. I know we've noticed in Central America there's been some links broken because funds went to do the transnational, and a lot of the links of the peasant unions have, from the local up to the national coordinating bodies in each country have begun to wither. And how do we deal with those things? Because that's a huge issue. So, yeah.
Michel Berlet from ACTER. Well, ACTER is not an academic institution. It's not a civil society organization. It's something very difficult to define, It's a network of persons. But what I would like to make 4 suggestions. I think that we have really a very big problem worldwide. It's not easy to solve. No? And it's very interesting to have this kind of colloquium, of contact between researchers, academicians, and people from civil society and farming organization. I think that we have 4 big problems to address that maybe are not enough studied still. So the first one, I think it's an ancient, an old problem. It's the analysis of all the agrarian reform processes of the past. No? I think that we have not enough thought about that. No? The second one is the question of the economic issue. So what are we talking about? We spoke of the ground rent. I think it is something very important to put back on discussion and to see what we are talking about when we are speaking of land grabs. I think that we are speaking of ground rent grabs in a lot of situations. The third one is the question of legal pluralism, which is not present in this colloquium, very few addressed. And I think the recognition of different kinds of rights is a fundamental issue to be studied and to be we have to go further to the question of ownership and to recognize several kinds of rights on the same plot, no? From different instances, individuals, communities, states, and the humanity as a whole. No? And the last one is that I think that we have to go to mandatory guidelines, but we have also to think of how we can build a legal system above the states and above the transnational corporations. And this is a very, very important issue that we have to work on, because it's not easy, and we will need a lot of years to come to some acceptable solution.
We'll ask our panelists here to respond 1 minute each, maximum of 1 minute each, to all the questions. Just pick up, please pick up the harder questions, not the softer one, because for the second round, I'm sure Klaus and company will have questions for you.
All right. Then I'll be quick. Well, I agree on the moratorium on land grabbing. We have been talking about it with the Campesina and we're part of the global campaign on agrarian reform. And this is a moratorium that needs to happen and needs to be moved, and we want everybody's support on that issue. One issue, again, when we look at the, for example, land occupations, it's interesting that a company that takes over land is completely legally in their rights, whereas peasants that reclaim their land are called squatters and violators. And I think this is a very, very serious ethical conundrum, contradiction, crime in our legal system. The legal systems are completely inadequate to protect those. And I can't tell you how often I have talked with government, been in government discussion where basically the governments will say, well, gee, these guys are squatters, so they shouldn't be on the land. Regardless of what they are, what gives anybody in any society the right to displace thousands of people and subject them to that kind of violence, squatter or no squatter? You know, it is not the issue. So the point is, I agree with Michel and many others that, you know, we have to really put our politics on the table and say, these are political issues, and rights are political issues. These are exercises of power. There's nothing technical or, you know, academic about it. So I think that's one area we really need to explore and work on together. Esteva asked, I think, why are we still at this stage? I think, personally, we're at this stage because we allowed it to happen. You know, we allowed our knowledge systems, our policy-making systems, our political processes to be hijacked and to be stolen by ruthless capital and ruthless actors. I think we saw that. Over break, I can give you examples of things that have happened in my state and other places where people could have spoken out, but they don't. You know, it's like the frog in hot water. As the water is heated up gently, the frog doesn't jump out because they can keep tolerating it. They can keep tolerating it until they reach a point where the water is so hot they die. And I think that's what we're doing. Unfortunately, we're doing this to our brothers and sisters who are protecting our ecosystems, and that's, you know, that is really a crime. And the last point is on the political parties issues. My take on that is we have to find ways to capture the state to make it work for us. And I know there are going to be friends in the audience who we've been discussing issues in the state, so I'm sure they'll give some knowing smiles. But I think we have to find a way to make the state work. Because either that, or we have to break up into anarchic self-government communities, which is also fine by me. If there is a way, that ensures rights. But as long as we stay within this nation-state model that has all these expectations, no? I mean, the nation-state model allocates qualities, characteristics, duties, responsibilities, right? Now those duties, responsibilities are not being performed for those who need them most. And so we have to recapture that back, and that's what I would do with political parties.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Right, I agree that we need to support local movements who are resisting land grabs, absolutely. And I think Oxfam's doing that around the world in different ways. But I don't think that lets us off trying to get the systemic changes needed. So we do also need the sort of more boring institutional work. And as to our vision of the future, I sort of disagree really that the food system is about to collapse. I agree that it's broken. I agree that it's not working for the majority of people. But I think it's being captured by an ever more powerful elite, actually. And looking over the past 20 years, what's changed? What's changed is they've become more powerful. We've seen more and more concentration in the hands of fewer and fewer people, more political power. And I don't think it's nation states. We're talking about multinational companies. We're talking about A, B, C, D. You know, ADM, Cargill, Bunge. You know, I think 3 traders control 90% of the wheat trade now. This has changed. This is what we need to address. We need to address these systemic issues. We need to start, you know, pulling the curtain on these guys. You know, who are they? Exposing them. They've been behind a screen. So yeah, that's what I'd say. And about the positive vision, the final thing is, we're sort of losing the debate with national governments. They are viewing these large-scale investments as a positive for development, as promoting food security. How can we reverse this? How can we be on the same side as national governments in fighting these investments? I think that's a challenge to us.
I have no idea how to get into these questions. Well, I'll start with the easy one. I think there's a little bit of confusion in the room about what is the voluntary guidelines and what is the right principles. They're 2 different things, and it's quite a contested terrain. And I invite you to look more closely at both of them, and to answer the question of Kojo, I think it was, about what specifically, which policies do we want. Look at the voluntary guidelines. Not the voluntary guidelines themselves, but civil society has spent the last year, Sofia will show you maybe, the copies are available. We've spent the last year in regional and constituency processes sitting down to discuss exactly and specifically as possible which policies we want. And the result of this really broad consultation is there. And there's lots of very specific things, and there's the pluralistic legal regimes, and there's caps on how much private investment there should be. And there's very specific things. I don't say that this is the answer to capitalism, but I think it's been a really good process for us to try and articulate more specifically what we want and try and understand each other better in the food sovereignty movement. So, yeah, I think I can't do more.
Respond to Jeff's question about something.
Yeah, the money.
No,
the money.
The broken links between transnational and local movements.
Yeah, but specifically you were saying the money is tighter now and it's going more to the global level, no?
Yeah, I mean, the shift happened in the early 90s, and now the links to the base unions have been broken in this basis. So what happened?
I can only speak of my own experience. Iran doesn't get a lot of this kind of funding, so we're used to working with very little, and we still have very little, and it's okay because we still continue. On more the IPC level, on the global level of what we're doing, we're seeing that money is being channeled more and more away to the more sort of politically neutral or more mainstream institutions.
Can you give examples on that?
I'd rather not. I'd rather not, thank you. Sofia can do it. Or Andrea.
Okay, on the question on investment, are we completely against investment? Are we calling for the peasant republics? I think the investment issue, unpacking what is investment, has been not so, almost absent of this conference. And I think it is an extremely important issue for us, because it has been automatically put as a synonym to private investment. And we think this is deeply flawed. For instance, we know that peasants themselves, women, put quite a lot of work which is unpaid, which is not visible, which is not monetized. And we don't have even the methodological tools to just measure or try to make it visible. Second, we don't believe in the assumption that there is no public money there. So we want to look really into very empirical debate. Okay, how much money does this state have? Where is it going to? And second, Michel has done quite some contribution on that. Are there really no ways to increase public money? Because this just got a taboo. There is no public money. We are very sorry. We have to call in all these investors because they are the ones who have the money. So of course, we have to lead this discussion. And we have to see what is the role of private investment. But as Andrea said, according to a strategy, a public policy strategy, which prioritizes small-scale agriculture, pastoralism, and all these things. And then we have to see what role is left for private investment. Thank you very much.
Okay. In Indonesia, the lands controlled by the investment is 95 million. That amount is equal 93% land in Indonesia controlled by the investment. Only 11.6 million controlled by the farmer. And in Indonesia, there are 40 million family farmers, control 11 million. So the land grabbing issue is seriously about us as a farmer. If we don't stop the land grabbing, I think in the future there is no farmer have land. So I think we must solve the problem based on the agrarian reform to distribute the land for the farmer. Thank you.
Yes, I think that it's important that we look to the data. We often forget that who's feeding the world are the smallholder now. And this is very important because it seems that it's the international trade that is feeding the world. This is fake, and you are a researcher, and you must know that. This is very important. Otherwise, we can't understand each other. So, starting from this point, so we are not all the folkloristic people. We are feeding you first. But this is important because we need to have public policy on agriculture all over the world. There is a place of private investment. There is a place of private investment. But there is another thing to have to clarify. Private investment is not capital speculation. There are two different things. The backbone of more or less all the economy worldwide are the small and medium enterprise. Small and medium that are private, their main role is remunerate work. And they remunerate their capital 3, 4, 5%. And they are private, and we need them. And we need the role of the private sector. But this is totally different from speculation capitals. They want money in fast time, and it's not compatible with agriculture. And agriculture can't be think as another economic sector. So this has to be clear. About independence and research. Well, all the technical research centers are heavily funded by the private sector. I have never had the problem with independence. So I please invite you to work with us, and you will be independent, and this is why it's important the role. Because you must be a researcher. You must be a researcher. You have to look further than us. We have to sell tomato, and we have something more important things to do daytime. But you can look a bit further.
Thank you very much. We still have 5 minutes.
The comment or the question I want to make is in a lot of parts of the world there are very good statutory laws, policy written on paper. They exist. They're inclusive, they're pro-poor, they're gender positive, but they just exist on paper. They're not being implemented, they're being corrupted, they're being ignored. So when we talk about voluntary guidelines, what are the chances, if statutory laws, constitutional
rights are not being implemented, what are the possibility that a voluntary guideline is, or principles are going to be followed? It's a quaint idea, but it's just quaint. And then beyond, let's say you get to a point where you have mandatory principles or guidelines or whatever, I think beyond that you need enforcement, you need political will, you need monitoring, and you have to, but the most important thing is political will and accountability.
Okay, I'm Ben Gardner from the University of Washington, Guttal. So one thing that's come up throughout the conference, and I think is clear, is that social mobilization is key. All this conversation about regulation, about voluntary guidelines. But the question has come up time and again, and I think you guys really have the experience, and maybe Maryam especially working both with pastoralists and agriculturalists. What are the narratives that can create the kind of broad-based coalitions, trans-regional, trans-cultural, bring pastoralists and peasants together? Just, I'm curious to hear more about the kind of narratives, whether that's lost livelihoods, food security, that can actually connect quite disparate and often disjointed social movements to make the kind of broader impact that I think a lot of us are trying to imagine here today.
3 points. The first one is on semantic, and it's related to what Andrea just said. Farming is not a state industry. It's the private industries of at least 500 million smallholders in the world. And those are the biggest, by far, not only producers of food, they are by far the biggest investors in agriculture. And when I'm a bit concerned sometimes that each time we hear investment in this room, it is equal investment by the multinational corporation in land grabs. No. The important investment is this very diffuse, insufficient, unfortunately in many cases due to poverty and due to the fact that the financial services are not serving this constituency. But this is where the future is to invest in this, or more, to support smallholder investing in their farms. So I think it's very important that we don't misuse the term investment. The second point is try to respond what is the difference between the voluntary guidelines and the right principle. This came before. It's very different. The voluntary guidelines are a normative piece of work approved and decided by the constituency of FAO, and that is supported and that will be approved by a UN body. The right principles are a contribution, it's formally presented, a contribution to an internal discussion by technicians of 4 international institutions. They don't have any, currently, they don't have any normative character. The question is, will they reach this? And as you know, this is important. Last year the CFS decided that they will consider, the government will consider these principles. And this consideration that will come over the next 2 years is, I think, a very important opportunity to discuss this relation between investment and land issues. Also because this discussion will be done at the same time where the voluntary guidelines will be approved. My last point, sorry June if I'm wrong, mandatory guidelines. How do we think that in an instance that where the decision makers are the governments, in FAO for example, they will decide as and recognize as mandatory something which is in their own country they would never accept. So how can we imagine that we will have something around these guidelines more in a way progressive than what we can have in single country? I think this is a very important political discussion. We had success, for example, around the UN Declaration for Indigenous Peoples. But let's remember that the very definition of indigenous peoples remains something in the hands of government.
I was on a question in the first round on political parties, because there is was a lot of talk and findings that the problem is good governance, implementation of good regulations. But governments, even if there are no good governments, are no monoliths. So is there a window of opportunity when there is a kind of clash between political clans, and how can you use it as a...
My name is Annelies Holmes. My question has to do with the danger of having so many parallel debates, and each debate has its own lobby. So where we are now discussing land grabbing, there's another conference where people are discussing, for example, the needs to make all kinds of investments in biofuels, etc., because of climate change. My question, or biodiversity, to keep biodiversity, my question is, are we in the right, how is the strength of this lobby in comparison to the other lobbies, and shouldn't we make alliances with other groups that are in, or focus on the other lobby groups who might be more strong?
Thank you. That's James Fairhead from the University of Sussex. One issue that I've been a bit concerned about that hasn't been addressed in the last couple of days is the extent of economic growth that has occurred in the last decade, which is putting out so much more commerce. So perhaps if you have a 10%, 5 to 10% growth across economies, you have a much larger degree of economic activity, just a larger volume of it, and it's happening very fast. So that's the first point. Now, that is throwing a great deal of commercial activity out into the parts of the world that we're studying. But when you have a collapse in the economic growth in certain areas, you actually have a lot of people who don't have capital. So on the one hand, we've been talking about small investors with capital, but at one level or another, there are an awful lot of people who used to be powerful who are actually now broke. And they can get resources through force. So my understanding of the DR Congo is that people are getting land by grabbing it with a gun, not with capital. And one of the reasons is that they're doing that because they don't have capital.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Baviora from the New York University School of Law. I have a very quick question. I'm wondering, is there a role for microfinancing? And if so, what role is that? And if so, would we want to promote something like that, or are there too many attendant problems to be going down that path?
30 seconds each. We have our coffee break.
I apologize, I didn't answer to your question on food security. What does it mean? That it is clear for us it's food sovereignty, so for us it's local market, for us it's a new governance of the food chain, and none of the land grabbing project can go in that direction. It's clearly, it's impossible, because it's a model of production that has a model of distribution that is absolutely incompatible with food sovereignty, but this is why. So, coming back on the capital, we have to be clear on the problem that the capital are everywhere. We have a narrative problem. We think that the land grabbing problem is the bad north guy that are investing in the south. This is another thing that you guys explain us, and you have to know each other now. I mean, it is not true. The capital are everywhere, are in the south, are in the north, and they are making the same. All speculative capital, the origin is not so important in that sense. So you have to, this is very important. And so investment, I totally agree that we have to talk about new investment. So I think that we should, we should go further right. Because right is too linked on the problem of land. We have to speak about private investment in agriculture, and it's a broader term, and otherwise we are linked too much on the land issue, and we do, that is not. I mean, I can have land, but then, I mean, it's only a small part of the question.
Thank you.
Okay, because my time grabbed my breath. I just closing statement. In order to find a solution to the problem with land grabbing right now, it is urgent that agricultural policy start supporting small-scale sustainable production and move away from an agribusiness model. Thank you.
On the question of mandatory or voluntary, we can't give up, Jean-Philippe. This has been our business in Geneva the whole time. Of course, governments don't want to recognize any obligation. Of course not, but we will fight on that. And a statutory law is the same thing. This is on paper. Of course, laws are on paper, and we need political, legal strategies of mobilizing and reclaim and get back what is ours. So that's the way.
Yes, I would agree with Sofia. I think you answered your own question. We need political will and laws are not enough. We're saying exactly the same thing. Laws are not enough, but would you want to live in a world without any laws? I don't think so. So it's a question of, as Sofia said, it's the mobilizing. Just one point on the RAI. I understand that it's being presented as a global discussion, a contribution to a global discussion, but as time progresses and as you see, oh, now we want to do pilot testing in 4 countries and a contribution to a global discussion, which then has a lot of funding to be pilot tested.
I want to pick up very, very quickly on the idea that was raised about the parallel conferences that are out there. Oxfam's new campaign isn't going to look just at land grabbing, we're also going to work on climate change, biofuels, food price volatility, a whole range of issues, and seek alliances across all those things. But we're also going to try and understand where those other constituencies are coming from. This, I don't know how many of you are aware of this World Agribusiness Investors Conference. There was one held last year in London, and in May in Chicago, they're all getting together. And the difference between this conference and that is really quite extreme. You know, the investors there, you know, who are the big ones, it's Altima, Emergent, you know, these huge private equity funds, they're all saying, we can get you rates of 20% rate of return, you know, and we need to be in those spaces as well. Oxfam goes to those, you know, and listens to how they're framing this, and believe me, it's very, very different. And to challenge it, we need to understand it and where they're coming from.
I think global land grabbing is a process, or they are processes of collusion, and the process of collusion by a number of different actors. It's not happening by unity. So there, you know, there's national and transnational corporations, there's capital, there's local elites, there's national elites, there's governments, etc. There's also civil society, academia, and there's all of us. We're all, if we're not fighting land grabbing, I think we're colluding with it. And I think we need to ask some hard questions. Why is there money to bail out the banks, but there's no money to bail out our smallholders? Is it because majority of the middle class, which includes us, have our savings in financial markets? And it is of our interest, it is to our interest that the banks are bailed out, but we forget where we eat. We forget that it is farmers, and mostly small-scale entrepreneurs who are producing our food. It's easy for us to go to a Tesco, or in India, all the different supermarkets, the retail stuff that's coming out, and forget that somebody somewhere is laboring for this food. So I think we have to make ethical decisions where we position ourselves. And for Focus and Elran, all I can say is that we will be out in the streets with the farmers and with the smallholders, and we really hope that this action of mobilization on the streets will be supplemented and complemented by other discourses, you know, among government officials, among academia, and among donors. Thank you, and I look forward to working with all of you again.
Thank you very much. We formally now close our session, but you can continue to hound these panelists throughout the day for the unanswered questions. Thank you very much. Great, thank you very much. Excellent session.